Well, hi, everyone. I think it's about the hour. Time to begin a celebration, in my opinion. And I can't think of a better way for that celebration to begin by remembering one evening in October of 1994 when Carl Sagan spoke in front of a number of his colleagues at Cornell University, and that very, very famous "a pale blue dot" discussion was first heard. And I can't think of a better frame to begin an introduction for this year's 2012 Presidential Medal recipient, Mr. Bill McKibben. So please let us welcome Bill. Let me give you a little bit of a background on him. Bill McKibben is the Schumann Distinguished Scholar at Middlebury College. He is the author of over a dozen books in environmental matters, beginning in 1989 with his The End of Nature. His most recent book, Earth, describes the new planet that we and our children, and maybe their children, will inhabit in the not-too-distant future. He is the founder of 350.org, an ever-growing grassroots climate-centered campaign that has coordinated literally thousands of peaceful rallies in over 190 countries since 2009 to draw attention to the rapidly changing environment of our only home, where we live, and that we've affected. In his undergraduate years, he was president of the Harvard Crimson newspaper. He holds honorary degrees from over a dozen colleges and universities. In 2011, he was elected a fellow of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences. He has been awarded the Guggenheim and Lyndhurst Fellowships and won the Lannan Prize for Nonfiction Writing in 2000. Colleagues, friends, thank you for all being here, and let us please give a round of welcome to this year's Presidential Medal recipient, Bill McKibben.
Thank you, sir.
There's some fresh water there, right there, okay?
Thank you so much. Well, thank you so much for that kind introduction. It's a real pleasure to be here, and of course, as I said earlier, a great honor to get this medal. I've been looking forward to coming here for a while, in part because I sort of wondered what a few thousand geologists all in the same place would look like, sort of. I have a shout out to my wonderful colleagues at Middlebury in the geology department, but there's only a certain number of them. I've sort of experienced geologists in a kind of homeopathic dose, to this point. And my sense, at least at first from listening in and elevators and things, was that, as one would expect, there was an enormous amount of discussion of argon dating and things. But then at lunch, there seemed to be this I was sitting next to a couple of people at this president's lunch, and there was a very good discussion of wine going on that I was listening in very happily for all, until I figured out that the discussion was actually of what soil was beneath it. Was it Precambrian or not that they were, engaged in? You're a very studious and solemn bunch, I must say. And here you are on this beautiful day, gathered inside in a windowless room again, and now, and it will probably just give you great pleasure that you get to listen to someone whose main role in life is to be a professional bummer-outer of other people, I'm not, since we're in this company, and since we have people I can see down front, Michael Mann, great scientists, I'm going to belabor the science of climate change. My guess is that all of you know good and well what's going on. Let me say, though, that I think it's an extremely interesting, unparalleled moment. Suffice it to say, you're the first geoscientists who are getting to live through and observe in real time a kind of change in epochs. As we move away from the Holocene and we move into something else for which we have no particularly good name yet, and which we don't yet know how far down that path we will go. But just think about the things that have happened in the lifetimes of almost everyone in this room. They're as large as any of the things we study at the great boundaries between other epochs. The ocean is 30% more acid than it was when I was born. The atmosphere, on average, is about 4.5 or 5% wetter, simply because warm air holds more water vapor than cold. That's an, just almost staggering change in a basic physical parameter of the Earth. One of the first things that if you were landing on a new planet someplace, you'd try to measure, and ours is 5% different over the last 40 years. Look at what happened this summer up in the Arctic, where we broke the old record for melt by mid-August, and it just kept on going. By the time the summer was over, we had by area about 50% less ice than we did in the summer 40 years ago, and by volume we think about 75% less ice. This was the summer when, I think in layman's terms, one could safely say that it became completely clear that we'd broken the Arctic, that we'd broken one of the biggest physical features on Earth, and done it in very, very short order. And of course, the thing to realize about all of this is that the changes that I'm describing, massive as they already are what happen when you raise the temperature of the Earth 1 degree. 1 degree. Trap, about 3/4 of a watt of extra solar energy per square meter of the Earth's surface. What we're talking about, what all the scientists who told us this would happen now tell us will happen unless we get off coal and gas and oil far faster than any government currently plans, is that 1 degree will be 4 degrees or 5 degrees before the century is out. If 1 degree melts the Arctic, it beggars the imagination to imagine what numbers like those will do. Our colleagues in other disciplines give us just the smallest hints. The agronomists tell us that from this point on, we can expect each degree increase in global average temperature to cut grain yields by about 10%. And if you were paying attention to the Midwest this summer, you saw easily how that could happen. Try to imagine a planet with 10 or 20 or 30% fewer calories on it, and then try to imagine if there's anything that your colleagues in political science have ever encountered that it's anything like that. My point is that this is a moment of epochal change, not only for geologists, but for everybody who looks at any aspect of the world's operations. This is by far the largest thing that humans have ever done, by far. And we have to, and here I leave the realm of straight science for the realm of advocacy. In my view, we have to try very quickly to do what we can to slow down and limit this change. We obviously have waited too long to stop global warming. It is well underway, but we retain, at least for the moment, some capacity to slow it down and limit its eventual upper bound. And that is, I think, by far the most important work in the world. And I want, in some sense, to enlist more of you in it and more actively in it. And so I'll begin just by telling you my observations about what hasn't worked, because one of the few advantages of having spent most of my life since 1989 engaged in this project is I have a pretty good idea of the things that aren't working at a fast enough speed to get the job done. The first response of everybody, and very appropriately, is to say we should do things in our personal lives or in our homes or on our campuses to slow down the amount of carbon we pour into the atmosphere. And this is, in fact, entirely correct. And if you saw my home covered in solar panels and, walls thick with insulation and things, you would see that I agree wholeheartedly with it. Our house won a prize in Vermont the year it was built for being the most energy efficient house, which in Vermont is actually a real competition. People are into this sort of thing. So I'm proud of that. but I try not to fool myself into thinking that this is a way in which we will actually solve this problem, given the time that physics and chemistry are allowing and the scale of the job. You cannot make the math work one household at a time. Given 100 years, that kind of slow cultural change, evolution, you know, I do something, my brother-in-law sees it, he does something, you know, his neighbors, that would work. But we do not have that kind of time. It clearly is also going to take serious systemic structural reform to do things like, for instance, the powerful thing that our brothers and sisters in the economics discipline have told us now for a quarter century, that we should attach a price to carbon to reflect the damage that it does in the atmosphere, and not let it be let the fossil fuel industry be the one industry on the planet that gets to throw out its waste for free. Okay? So, the second response, and the obvious one, would be, well, okay, since we need systemic structural response, let's go to Washington, to Beijing, to the UN, to whatever. And of course, people have tried that a good deal. I've watched every year for a quarter century as our greatest geoscientists have trotted up to Capitol Hill obediently over and over and over again and sat on panels and explained exactly what was going on, explained that the worst thing in the world was happening, and then left. And the result has been, in this country, a pretty much perfect 25-year bipartisan record of accomplishing nothing. Okay? And so one has to then ask why this avenue isn't working and what we need to do about it. And my conclusion at 25 years of working on this is that it's pretty clear why it isn't working and what we need to change. The incredible political power of the fossil fuel industry, the richest industry in the history of the world. Exxon made more money last year than any company in the history of money. Okay? Their power has been enough to effectively block change here and around the world. It turns out that in our systems, the easiest thing to do is prevent change, and they have been more than equal to that task and continue to be. Last week, for instance, or the week before, Chevron gave the largest single campaign donation in the wake of the Citizens United decision, $2.5 million to a right-wing super PAC, to make sure that their ability in Congress to block change of any kind would continue. We're clearly, the insight that I had about 5 years ago was that with these other channels blocked or ineffective, and with it very clear that we were never going to outspend the fossil fuel industry, we were going to have to find other avenues, other currencies maybe is the right word, other currencies in which to work. And those were going to have to be the currencies of movement, passion, spirit, creativity. We were going to have to bring those to bear on a large scale. Now, when I figured that out, I actually had no idea how to do it at all. I'm a writer by training, not an activist. Writers are people who, left to their own devices, would prefer to sit in their room and type, you know. I'm not an orator or an activist, but we figured that something had to be done. And so we decided to go to work. When I say we in this case, the somewhat preposterous we was myself and 7 undergraduates at Middlebury College in Vermont, where I teach. And we thought, I mean, one would have thought that our biggest problem would be we had no organization and no money. We thought our biggest problem was, how do we reach people around the world, since this is, they don't call it global warming for nothing, how do we reach people around the world since they all speak different languages? This is going to be very hard. And our solution came courtesy of Jim Hansen at NASA, who, as most of you know, is probably our most important climatologist. He and his team in the fall of 2008 produced a paper saying, we now know enough about carbon to say roughly how much is too much. They said any value for carbon in the atmosphere greater than 350 parts per million is, so I can quote this, not compatible with the planet on which civilization evolved and to which life on Earth is adapted. So that's strong language, obviously, for scientists to use. And of course, it's stronger still since the atmosphere outside in North Carolina and North Vietnam is 395 parts per million and going up about 2 parts per million per year. We're already too high, hence the melting Arctic. So it was a depressing paper to read. But we figured, let's take that number, because Arabic numerals jump lightly across linguistic boundaries. The sort of using the thing that scientists figured out a long time ago, that they could effectively communicate in ways that very few others, musicians being maybe the other exception, could figure out how to communicate around the world. And so we built what's turned into the first global campaign to try and just address climate change. And we've done it around this number, 350.org. When we started, as I say, we had no reason to expect success, but we were ignorant enough to be self-confident. Of those 7 young people, they noticed that there were 7 continents on the planet, so each one of them took one. The one that took the Antarctic also had to take the internet, and they went to work. And our work was to find people like ourselves around the world, and they're not always environmentalists. Often they're people worried about hunger, about war and peace, about development, about women's rights, about all the things we won't have on a disintegrating planet with 20% fewer calories or whatever. And our goal was to just take this scientific number and stick it into the bloodstream of the planet. And so we asked people around the world to do this on the same day to try and take this. We didn't know how well this global day of action would work. We got the sense that it might work 2 days early when we were sitting around our office, one-room office, around the one table, the 8 of us with our laptops open, hard at work, and the phone rang, and it was our leader in Ethiopia. Who, like all our leaders, like all of us, was a volunteer, and like many, was a 17-year-old girl. And she was on the phone almost in tears, and she said, the government took away our permit for the weekend. We're going to do the rally today before they can stop us, which was brave, but that wasn't why she was crying. She was just like, we so wanted to do this with everybody else in the world. We don't want to spoil it for everybody. We wanted to do it the same time as everybody else. We're so sorry, and we have 15,000 young people out in the street right now chanting 350, okay? So I was like, Luau, don't worry about the date, it's okay. And I was amazed, because it was the kind of first proof that, in fact, people were completely capable of dealing with the somewhat technical, that's, a scientific, kind of wonky scientific data point. People, this will be too hard. I said, no, it won't be too hard. The thing that people will figure out is it's a number, and we're above it, we're too high. So, it's like going to the doctor, and the doctor says, your cholesterol's too high, you're going to have a heart attack. Not many people say, I need a full disquisition on the lipid system before I can react to this. And only the real idiots go home and search the internet for some website that says cholesterol doesn't exist or, whatever, okay? So it was an amazing weekend that followed. There were 5,200 demonstrations in 181 countries. CNN called it the most widespread day of political activity in the planet's history. The second picture came from U.S. servicemen in Afghanistan. The 350 with sandbags sent us a note saying we're parking our Humvee for the weekend and walking, okay? But most of the pictures, and here's the other thing that really struck me, were pouring in. I'd always been told that environmentalism was something for rich white people, and that if you worried where your next meal was coming from, you wouldn't be an environmentalist. That just turns out to be nonsense. Most of the people that we work with around the world are poor and black and brown and Asian and young, because that's what most of the world is composed of. And oddly, they're just as interested in the future as anybody else. There's people in dugout canoes someplace on the Congo River above Kinshasa. They don't even have, they don't have a digital camera. They try to develop this in someone's home darkroom. It doesn't come out very well, so they have to write in what their banner had said. But there they were, in what Conrad, in his Eurocentric way, had called the heart of darkness, and fully engaged and involved. And, some people just very creative and funny all I stuck that one in honor of your sea level rise panel this morning. But, great involvement among religious communities. There's the head of Muslim South Africa Indigenous Traditions, the Anglican Archbishop at the head of a big multi-faith march. There's the most important evangelical college in the country where Billy Graham went to school. I'd been to the Middle East to do some organizing. You can't really get across borders easily, so since the Dead Sea is falling rapidly, the Jordanians said, we'll make the 3 on our shore, the Palestinians said, we'll do the 5, and the Israelis said, we'll do the 0 where we are. A lot of good things like that going on around the world. 300 big demonstrations in China. Those are our friends and colleagues in the Maldives, a 5,000-year-old culture. It's probably not going to be a 5,100-year-old culture because the highest point in the archipelago is 1.5 meters above sea level. You want to know what coming out of the Holocene means, that's what it means if you live in the Maldives. This was the biggest story on Google News for 36 hours, and I think the reason is that editors were astonished to see what environmentalists look like. There's Yemen, one of the toughest places on Earth. The 0 is all women in full black burqa. Okay, so to us, they don't resemble members of the Sierra Club, but in fact, they have just the same kind of cast of mind. They're not thinking about themselves, they're thinking about the future. And, the same, there's Abu Dhabi, oil-rich sheikhs, but really wiser than some oil-rich sheikhs. That's the biggest solar array on Earth behind them, too. Their plan, I believe, is to remain rich no matter what. There were 400 or 500 pictures that went into a file called 350 Adorable, and they really were adorable. And they also were incredibly bittersweet to look at. I mean, those kids may well be refugees in the course of their life, and not because they've done anything at all to cause what's going on. So we've kept on doing this kind of work. We've now organized about 20,000 rallies in every country but North Korea, and I'm just going to flip through pictures here as fast as ever I can. I just want you to get some sense of what other people who worry about this, what your colleagues look like and where they are and, what they're up to. It's always moving. We have about 40,000 pictures in the Flickr account, so I won't, force you to look at all of them. But it's beautiful to see, and beautiful to see them involving art. There's 3,000 people making an image of King Canute on the beach at Brighton, trying to hold back the water. And we're doing art projects so big with so many people that we needed satellites to get a sense of really how big they were. And, just very beautiful. That's 2,000 or 3,000 people in a dry riverbed in Santa Fe. And when the satellite came over, they all flipped up blue sheets and cardboard and things, and suddenly the river came to life, and it was extremely beautiful. So we've done this kind of work as best we can now all over the world. And we've begun the process that we should have begun long ago of building this sort of movement, and it really has gotten bigger and stronger. And now we're trying to figure out more and more how to put it to use, how to really start making it count in the time we have. So we've gotten a little sharper in the last couple of years in the work that we're doing. Last year, we spearheaded this drive to try and stop the Keystone Pipeline down out of the tar sands of Canada. Again, because a certain number of Earth scientists said to us, you guys might want to pay some attention. That's the second largest pool of carbon on the planet. Now, it'll take a while to get it all out, but if you could burn all the economically recoverable oil in the tar sands tonight, thank God you can't, but if you could, the atmospheric concentration of CO2 would rise from 395 to 540 parts per million. Okay? That's why it's not a good idea to even start. That's why we'd be very unwise to put a pipeline that would carry 900,000 barrels of petroleum a day, almost precisely the amount that we will save if we adopt the automobile efficiency standards that the Obama administration is currently at work on. So it would negate that entire operation simply by putting this one pipeline through. We knew that nobody knew about this, and we knew it was completely going to pass, that it was a done deal. So we figured our only hope was to draw attention to it, and so we asked people to come to Washington and get arrested. And people did. It turned into the largest civil disobedience action in 30 years in this country about any issue. 1,253 people went to jail. And then it started spreading. In Canada, people went to jail up on Parliament Hill, and then, you know, at embassies and consulates around the world. It's one of the good things about having, you know, people everywhere. And then we went back to Washington, and I'm sure there were people in this room who joined us when we surrounded the White House, 5 deep, shoulder to shoulder with people, and it was a beautiful day. And we didn't attack the president at all. All we said was, every banner was just a quote from the president in 2008. Things like, in my administration, the rise of the oceans will begin to slow, the thing that Mitt Romney made such fun of him for, you know. And 4 days later, November 10th of last year, he said, okay, we'll take a year out and actually study this thing. That's a temporary victory. Temporary victory is the only kind environmentalists ever win. This one may be more temporary than most, you know, because the oil industry has poured tens of millions of dollars into overturning it. But at least we demonstrated that we could begin to stand up to the power of the fossil fuel industry. That if we came together with this other currency, that we could put together enough of it to at least give them and their money, their cash, some challenge, and that was good. But it was also very clear as we were working on it that the amount of work it was taking to deal with this one pipeline made it obvious that we were not going to stop climate change one pipeline, one coal mine, one oil well at a time. We were going to have to go after the problem on a much more systemic and sweeping level. We were going to need real and difficult change. And so that's what we're at work on now. And I want to tell you, just give you a little preview of the work that we launch on Wednesday night, the night after the election in Seattle. And then we'll continue on a 21-city roadshow tour in 21 nights around the United States. I'm sort of tired already thinking about it. But there is a bed apparently in the back of the biodiesel bus where I will be for the month. And then we'll take it out around the world, beginning in early spring in Istanbul, when we're gathering 6 or 7 young people from every country on earth for a big summit, and then to spread this work out. Here's the analysis. I laid it out in a piece in Rolling Stone this summer that went unexpectedly viral. I knew it was going well when I got a call 2 days after it appeared from the editor of Rolling Stone, who sounded slightly shocked, and he said, you know, Justin Bieber was on the cover of that issue, but your article has 10 times more likes on Facebook. So something strange is happening. So the it was not that it was so well written, it was just that it laid out for the first time really in kind of very understandable terms the math of exactly where we are. It used 3 numbers to try and explain, try and communicate our current plight. The first of these is 2 degrees. 2 degrees is the only thing that the world has agreed to about climate change, that we should limit global warming to no more than 2 degrees Celsius, okay? The only outcome of that insane, huge Copenhagen Climate Summit, the only number that came out of it in this Copenhagen Accord was that we will try to, no timetables, no, just 2 degrees, that would be too much. Second number, which comes from the computer mob beginning in 2009 with a paper by Meinhausen, but many others have done more or less the same work now, and they're in rough agreement. We could emit about 560 gigatons more carbon between now and 2050 and have some chance of staying below 2 degrees. Okay, not a perfect chance, only about an 80% chance, so somewhat less than Russian roulette, but still, you know, better than nothing. 560, that's second. The third number, the new one, the scary one, the one that really put it in perspective, was 2,795 gigatons. It turns out that if you add up how much coal and oil and gas the fossil fuel industry and the countries that operate like fossil fuel companies, think Venezuela or Kuwait, if you add up how much they already have in their reserves, okay, if you burn it, you get 2,795 gigatons, or 5 times as much as the most conservative governments on earth say would be safe to burn. All right? That gas and oil and coal is still below ground, but economically it's above ground. That's what sets the share price for Shell and Exxon and whoever. If Peabody Coal goes to borrow money, that's what they borrow money against. Basically, that's all a fossil fuel company is its collection of reserves, okay? So there's a couple of lessons here. One of them is geologists have done way too good a job finding stuff, okay? You could stop with this part of the program now. We need no more. We have way more than we can safely burn. So please, do not look for any more. If you find more, don't tell anybody, okay? Because we need no more. The second thing, and I know that this is difficult for this assembly to hear and people to hear, but I'll try to say it in as straightforward terms as I can. These industries, which have been very important parts of our development for a long time, are no longer operating in helpful ways, okay? For the moment, until they make the decision to become energy companies instead of fossil fuel companies, for the moment, in some sense, they're operating as outlaw companies, not against the laws of the state. They're not doing anything illegal. Remember, they, to a very large degree, write the laws of the state. But they are, at this point, kind of outlaw against the laws of physics. And that's a bad place to be in. So the question is, how does one rein them in? How does one begin the process of trying to convince them to convert to becoming energy industries? At the moment, it's not going well. Even companies like BP, that a decade ago said it was going to be beyond petroleum, and they never invested very much in renewable energy, and they stopped doing it, all of it. 2 or 3 years ago, they sold off their wind and sun divisions because they were making so much money. The return on investment on fossil fuel was so high that they just said, we're putting all our chips on this, and, you know, never mind the consequences. How do we persuade them to do something different? When we launch this roadshow on Wednesday, one of the things we will be doing is going to colleges, college towns across the country. It's not the only part of this, but it's part of it, and trying to get going on those college campuses a movement that looks like the movement some of you may remember to divest from the stocks of companies doing business in apartheid South Africa a generation ago. That was a very difficult fight, but very useful in A, illuminating the problem for people and spreading the word, and B, eventually having some effect. When Nelson Mandela got out of prison, the first place he came was the United States, and he did not go to the White House. The first place he went was the University of California to thank students for putting enough pressure on their trustees that they divested $3 billion worth of stock in that company, in those companies. That kind of pressure was helpful. Desmond Tutu, who won the Nobel for his work in that struggle and who has been an advisor to 350.org from the beginning, said in a video message that he sent for this campaign, he said, this is the next great moral crisis that we have faced, and we need the same tools brought to bear. These companies can't hear moral arguments because they're companies, not people. It's not their fault. That's just, you know, how they set up. But they can feel other kinds of pressure, and so we need to bring it to bear. We'll be trying to do that, and we'll be trying to work in many other ways to take away, as it were, the social license of these companies until they stop operating recklessly in this fashion. The demands really would be that A, they cease to explore for new hydrocarbons. Exxon spends $100 million a day looking for more coal and gas and oil, even though we have 5 times more than we can burn at the moment. 2, that they cease lobbying in Washington. We can't take that we can't make sound policy decisions as long as they are pouring money into Washington in the quantities that they are. They were the biggest players in this year's election cycle. And C, that they sit down with all the rest of society and figure out a plan that will keep 80% of the reserves in the ground and that will speed mightily this transition to renewable energy, which is increasingly possible to imagine. There were days this summer when Germany, which is the one country in the world that has taken seriously this challenge, well, the one the one non-Scandinavian country that has taken seriously this challenge and gone to work on it. There were days this summer when they generated more than half the power they used from solar panels within their borders. Okay? And this is Germany. I mean, foggy, Wagnerian. Munich is north of Montreal. They don't have Arizona, California, Texas, Florida, New Mexico to help out in this process. Okay? What it demonstrates is that difficult as the engineering will be, and it'll be hard, that's not the real barrier. The real barrier is political will, and that happily is something we can muster if we want to, and I just think we have no choice but to try and muster it. We did a day this spring when all around the world we asked people who had already felt the sting of climate change to rally in those places and kind of send a message to the rest of the world. And they were amazing to look at. You know, they're first, since the sun rises first in the Marshall Islands, there they were underwater on their coral reef, which is not faring well in the acid, hot water. The ocean scientists just finished up their third big meeting on ocean acidification. And the guy, the kind of rapporteur for the meeting, said at the end when they were surveying all the papers that were offered, I think it was in California, but it was a few weeks ago, probably at Scripps, he said, yes, what's been shown this week is that by century's end, the world's oceans, if on their current course, the world's oceans will be hot, breathless, and sour. A kind of powerful image to have in one's mind. So that was the Marshall Islands, but they were coming in from everywhere. You would think in Afghanistan there were worse things to worry about, but really the flow of the Kabul River is a pretty key one, you know, and it's dwindling. Drought everywhere, rising sea. Well, some places the problems are not quite as bad as they are others, but bad enough, you know, if you like to ski. You know, wildfire. It wasn't just Colorado and New Mexico this year, it was Siberia that was burning too. You know, rising sea level in Micronesia. That top balloon is apparently where the level of the Dead Sea was 40 years ago. That picture came just from one of the million anonymous villages someplace in India. I have no idea how they heard about it, but it was a striking picture, and it just came with a little note attached. The note said, in toto, it said, "There is no water behind our dam anymore." I don't know how to respond to that. I don't know how to respond to, I mean, that's part of Pakistan where 20 million people were dislocated from their homes by floods 2 years ago. That's my home state of Vermont, which took it on the chin from Irene this time last year. You can see there in the Mad River at the edge of that field where the sand and rocks still left a year later from when it went wildly out of its banks. But the same thing all over the world, absolutely everywhere. I don't know, for some reason that picture just got me the most. You know, it's like a nasty, dirty street turned into river someplace in Haiti where, by the way, there's an absolutely hideous cholera outbreak going on in the wake of Sandy. Bad as New Jersey and Long Island suffered from that hurricane, Haiti suffered, it appears, far worse damage and loss of life. But their sign was just, when I looked at it, the sign it just says, he says, "Your actions affect me," which is absolutely true, and it doesn't work in reverse. There's nothing that anyone in Haiti can do to have any effect on this problem or on any of us. They don't burn any fossil fuel. They're not home to the, to the big oil companies. They're not the world's sole superpower. They don't bear any real moral responsibility for doing anything about it, but they are trying what they can to do something about it, to be in solidarity. And when I see pictures like that, it just strengthens my resolve. Not to be aggressive or unpleasant or confrontational, but just to sort of keep talking about what we now know the science to be and to follow it to its logical conclusions. And this campaign that we're launching, that I hope some of you will be a part of, that's one of those logical conclusions. Let me conclude with two observations that we had from those arrests that last year in Washington, because I'd never been to jail before, so it was a kind of, it wasn't enormous fun, 3 days in central cell block, but it wasn't the end of the world. I mean, the sort of end of the world is kind of the end of the world, and that, you know, so it's, I mean, it wasn't the end of the world. There were two things that were important, and one is that everybody was involved. When we sent out the letter asking people to come, I was worried that it would look like these things usually do, and I said, I don't think it's fair for college kids to have to be the cannon fodder for this. Because if you're 22 right now, it's arguable that an arrest record is not the thing you most need, you know, on your record, okay? It's fine to go sit in at the dean's office, you know, or something. That won't be. But one of the few unmitigated advantages of growing older is, past a certain point, what the hell are they going to do to you, you know? And so it was really good to see people who looked, you know, with sort of hairlines like mine arriving in D.C. We did not ask people, how old are you, because that would be rude, but we did cleverly say, who was president when you were born? And the two biggest cohorts came from the FDR and the Truman administrations, and on the last day there was a guy arrested wearing a sign that said, World War II vet, handle with care. He'd been born in the Warren Harding administration, which was so far ago that I really had forgotten that there was a Warren Harding administration. So that was good. And it's we really do all need to come together, and elders in our communities need to provide real leadership. When we're talking on campuses about divestment, it would be really good to have some professors helping in this process, okay? This is the kind of thing that tenure was made for, okay? That's why it exists, all right? Second thing, we ask people, if you come, will you wear a necktie or a dress, okay? Now, I mean, I wore a necktie today out of respect for you all, but I live in Vermont. Really, they're not a big part of my attire. But we wanted to make a visual point that I think is really at the heart of all this, which is that there is absolutely nothing radical about what we're asking for. Nothing. I mean, if you think about it, all anybody's really asking for is a world that's a little bit like the one we were born onto, that bears some resemblance to the world of the Holocene, where every human being whose history we know about, you know, lived. That's, if anything, that's a very conservative demand, you know, not a radical one at all. If you think about it in those terms, at the moment, you know, radicals are the people who run oil companies, because until they turn their attention to becoming energy companies, they're now, not in their past history, not when they began, when we didn't know anything about climate change, but now that we do know, they're engaged in the business of amassing a very big fortune by altering the chemical composition of the atmosphere, altering it in ways that very clearly are detrimental and dangerous. And that is a very radical act. In some ways, if you think about it, it's as radical an act as any human has ever engaged in. We're all implicated in it because we all use fossil fuel, okay? But for the most part, most of us don't care at all. I mean, we'd be happier if whatever was powering these lights was coming from the sun or the wind. The only people who really do care are those who are making an enormous amount of money at the moment from it, and who are spending some percentage of that money to warp our political system almost as fast as our atmosphere. And I look forward very much to the day when the enormous skills and talents of those companies and organizations are brought to the task, the biggest task that we face as a society, of making the rapid transition to where we need to go. That'll be a very, very good day. And their skills and talents will be of the highest use in that process. Think what that $100 million a day that Exxon is spending on hydrocarbon exploration would do were it applied to the task of solar and wind and the other things that we could use. That'll only happen if we collectively, as a society, tell them that they need to do it, okay? And that's now our job. I speak to you in part but only in part as geologists. In your professional life, you'll often be doing research and things that will bump up against this and be helpful, and you'll teach about it. But I'm really more interested in you as citizens, citizens of your campuses, if you're on a campus, citizens of the country and of the planet. That's where we need you after hours doing the work, since you know what the stakes are, to help change this dynamic. Let me end by saying there is no guarantee that we will win this fight. In fact, if one were betting on it, one would have to bet that we will lose, because we've been losing for 25 years. But given the stakes, whatever we can do to change the odds of that wager seem very much worth doing. And the only thing I will assure you is that there are people all over the world now fully engaged in this fight, many of them in places that did not cause it. It's always a great honor to be in those rooms, and it's a great honor to be in this room and to say thank you for the work that you've already done, and even more thanks for the work that you will do in the future going forward. I don't know if we win, but I know that it'll be a fight, and it'll be, well, it really will be an honor just to get to stand shoulder to shoulder with you as we make that fight. Thank you all very much.